Sarah Martinez had always believed she was invisible. Growing up in a small town outside Phoenix, she watched fighter jets streak across the desert sky from Luke Air Force Base, their thunderous roars shaking the windows of her grandmother's modest trailer. While other kids dreamed of becoming astronauts or movie stars, Sarah simply hoped someone would notice she existed. At 17, Sarah was the girl who sat in the back of every classroom, who ate lunch alone under the bleachers, and who worked nights at the local diner to help her grandmother pay bills. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 12, leaving her in the care of Maria Martinez, a woman whose arthritis-gnarled hands could barely hold a coffee cup, but whose heart was large enough to shelter a broken granddaughter. The diner where Sarah worked was a greasy spoon called Mel's that served truckers, construction workers, and occasionally off-duty Air Force personnel from Luke. Sarah had memorized every regular's order, could predict who would leave a decent tip and who would make her uncomfortable with lingering stares. She moved through her shifts like a ghost, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates while remaining largely unnoticed. Everything changed on a Tuesday night in October, when Staff Sergeant Michael Chen walked into Mel's wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself with the unmistakable posture of military training. Sarah had seen him before with other airmen, but tonight he was alone, sliding into a corner booth with a laptop bag and what appeared to be flight manuals. Sarah approached his table with the same quiet efficiency she showed every customer, coffee pot in hand and order pad ready. But when she reached for his empty cup, her elbow caught the edge of his laptop, sending it sliding toward the floor. Without thinking, Sarah lunged forward, catching the expensive device inches before it would have crashed onto the tile. "Nice reflexes," Chen said, genuinely impressed, as Sarah carefully placed the laptop back on the table. "You just saved about 3 months of my salary." Sarah mumbled an apology and started to retreat, but Chen gestured for her to wait. "I'm serious. That was incredible timing. You play sports?" "No, sir," Sarah replied quietly, using the respectful address she'd learned from serving military customers. "Just clumsy, I guess." That wasn't clumsy. That was instinct. Chen studied her with the same intensity pilots used when scanning instruments. "You ever think about joining the Air Force?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her? In the military? She was nobody special, just a girl who dropped out of high school to work full-time when her grandmother's medical bills piled up. "I don't think I'm the type, sir," Chen laughed, but not unkindly. "The type? You want to know what type makes good air crew? People who react fast under pressure. People who don't panic when things go wrong. People who put others before themselves." He gestured around the diner. "You've been taking care of everyone in here tonight. That's leadership." For the next hour, while Mel's stayed mercifully slow, Chen told Sarah about opportunities in the Air Force she'd never known existed. Not just flying, but air traffic control, aircraft maintenance, logistics, intelligence, programs that would pay for her education, provide health care for her grandmother, offer a chance at a life beyond small-town invisibility. "There's a recruiter's office in downtown Phoenix," Chen said as he prepared to leave, sliding a business card across the table. "Tell them Sergeant Chen sent you. Tell them you're interested in aircrew positions." Sarah stared at the card long after Chen left, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped down tables and counted the night's meager tips. When her shift ended at 2 in the morning, she drove through the empty streets to the overlook where teenagers sometimes went to watch planes take off from Luke. She sat on the hood of her beat-up Honda, listening to the distant rumble of night training flights, and for the first time in years allowed herself to imagine a different future. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work and drove to the recruitment office. The building was intimidating, all glass and steel with American flags flanked by recruiting posters showing confident young people in crisp uniforms. Sarah sat in her car for 20 minutes, engine running, ready to drive away a dozen times. Staff Sergeant Williams, the recruiter, was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She listened to Sarah's story without judgment, asked about her education, her family situation, her goals. When Sarah mentioned Chen's suggestion about aircrew positions, Williams nodded thoughtfully. Aircrew is competitive, Williams explained, but we're always looking for people with the right instincts. There are different paths: loadmaster, flight engineer, aerial gunner. Have you ever heard of combat systems officers? Sarah shook her head, feeling increasingly out of her depth. CSOs are the people who operate the electronic warfare systems, manage weapons deployment, navigate. They're the brains behind the pilot in advanced aircraft. It requires someone who can think fast, multitask under extreme pressure, and work as part of a tight team. Williams leaned forward. Based on what Sergeant Chen told me about your reflexes and situation awareness, you might be exactly what we're looking for. The testing process took weeks. Academic exams that challenged Sarah's high school dropout status, but revealed an intuitive understanding of mathematics and spatial relationships that surprised everyone, including herself. Physical fitness tests that pushed her beyond anything she'd experienced, but showed she could endure more than she'd ever believed possible. Psychological evaluations that probed her motivations, her resilience, her ability to function under stress. Through it all, Sarah felt like she was living someone else's life. The girl who had been invisible for so long was suddenly being evaluated, measured, considered for something important. Military personnel spoke to her with respect, called her Candidate Martinez, asked for her opinions and listened to her answers. The hardest part was telling her grandmother. Maria Martinez had raised Sarah to be practical, to accept limitations, to find contentment in small things. The idea of her granddaughter joining the military, possibly going into combat, potentially moving thousands of miles away, was terrifying. "Mija," Maria said, sitting at their small kitchen table with Sarah's enlistment papers spread before them. "This is a big dream. Big dreams can break your heart." "But what if they don't, Abuela?" Sarah replied, using her childhood name for her grandmother. "What if this is my chance to be someone who matters?" Maria reached across the table, her arthritic fingers finding Sarah's young, strong hands. "You already matter, Mija. You've always mattered, but maybe it's time for the world to see what I've seen all along." 3 months later, Sarah stood in formation with 49 other new recruits at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, beginning 8 weeks of basic military training that would either break her or transform her into someone she'd never imagined she could become. As the drill instructor's voice echoed across the parade ground, Sarah thought about the fighter jets she'd watched from her grandmother's trailer, about Sergeant Chen's unexpected faith in her potential, about all the ways a person could be invisible until the moment they chose to be seen. The journey from nobody to Eagle One was about to begin, though Sarah had no idea that within 2 years she would be sitting in the back seat of an F-16, her call sign earning respect from pilots who had spent decades mastering their craft. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. Basic training at Lackland transformed Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. The physical challenges were difficult but manageable. Her years of working long shifts at the diner had given her more endurance than she realized. The mental pressure was intense but clarifying. For the first time, someone was pushing her to discover her limits rather than accept her limitations. Technical Sergeant Rodriguez, her flight instructor, was a 20-year veteran who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had a gift for seeing potential in unlikely recruits and a reputation for producing some of the Air Force's finest aircrew members. During week 3 of basic training, he pulled Sarah aside after evening chow. "Martinez," he said, his tone serious but not unkind, "your test scores came back from the Aircrew Selection Board. You're in the 95th percentile for spatial reasoning and multitasking under pressure. That's rare." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Throughout basic training, she had tried to blend in, to be good enough without standing out. Old habits from years of invisibility died hard. More importantly, Rodriguez continued, your teammates trust you. In every exercise, they look to you when things get complicated. That's not something we can teach. That's instinct. 3 weeks later, Sarah graduated basic training in the top 10% of her class and received orders for combat systems officer training at Pensacola Naval Air Station in Florida. The program was 18 months long, notoriously difficult, and had a 40% washout rate. Sarah would be one of only 3 women in her class of 24 candidates. Pensacola was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The base sprawled along the Florida coast. Massive hangars housing training aircraft that ranged from vintage trainers to modern simulators that could replicate combat conditions with terrifying accuracy. The other candidates came from vastly different backgrounds. College graduates with aerospace engineering degrees, former enlisted personnel with years of technical experience, a few like Sarah who had surprised everyone by making it this far. Lieutenant Commander Ashley Park, the program director, addressed the new class on their first day with characteristic Navy directness. Ladies and gentlemen, you are here to learn one of the most demanding jobs in military aviation. Combat systems officers are responsible for electronic warfare, weapons systems, navigation, and threat assessment in aircraft that operate in the most dangerous environments on Earth. 50% of you will not complete this program. That's not a threat. It's a statistical fact. The coursework was overwhelming. Sarah found herself studying 18 hours a day, mastering everything from advanced radar systems to complex mathematical calculations required for weapons deployment. Her classmates included brilliant individuals who seemed to absorb technical information effortlessly, while Sarah had to fight for every concept she learned. But Sarah had advantages her classmates didn't recognize. Years of memorizing dozens of diner orders had given her exceptional working memory. Long nights managing difficult customers had taught her to stay calm under pressure. Most importantly, her experience taking care of her grandmother had developed her ability to think about others' needs even when facing her own challenges. The first major test came during Week 8, a simulated emergency scenario in a flight trainer where multiple systems failed simultaneously while the aircraft was under simulated enemy fire. Sarah's partner was David Kim, a brilliant MIT graduate who had sailed through every academic exam but struggled with real-time decision-making. As alarms blared and computer screens flashed warnings, Kim froze. Sarah could see him running calculations in his head, trying to solve the problems mathematically instead of reacting intuitively. Without thinking, she began calling out priority actions: which systems to reset first, how to redistribute power, what information the pilot needed most urgently. "Martinez, take the lead," Kim said, recognizing his own limitations in the moment. Sarah's hands moved across the control panels with surprising confidence, her voice steady as she communicated with the simulated pilot and managed the crisis. When the exercise ended, their instructor, Master Sergeant Williams, looked at Sarah with something approaching amazement. "Martinez, where did you learn to prioritize like that?" "I don't know, Master Sergeant," Sarah replied honestly. "It just felt obvious what needed to happen first." Word of Sarah's performance spread through the training squadron. Instructors began pairing struggling students with her for exercises, not because she was the smartest candidate, but because she had an intuitive understanding of how complex systems work together and how to help others perform under pressure. The breakthrough moment came during month 6, when Sarah's class began training in actual aircraft. The T-6 Texan was a turboprop trainer that could simulate many of the flight characteristics of modern combat aircraft. For the first time, Sarah found herself strapped into the back seat of a real airplane, headset crackling with radio chatter, ground falling away beneath her as they climbed toward the practice area. Her instructor pilot was Major Jennifer Santos, one of the few female pilots in the program and someone known for pushing students harder than anyone else. Santos had requested to fly with Sarah specifically because she wanted to see if the quiet girl from Arizona could handle the transition from simulator to reality. "Okay, Martinez," Santos's voice came through the intercom as they leveled off at 15,000 feet over the Gulf of Mexico. "I'm about to give you the most complex scenario we've run so far. Multiple threats, system failures, and time pressure. Your job is to keep us alive and mission effective. Ready?" What followed was 30 minutes of controlled chaos. Santos simulated everything from engine failures to electronic jamming to missile threats, while Sarah worked frantically to manage defensive systems, navigate around threats, and maintain communication with ground controllers. At one point, with sweat stinging her eyes and her heart racing, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had carried her through difficult nights at the diner, the ability to focus completely on what needed to be done next. When they finally landed, Santos sat quietly in the cockpit for several minutes before speaking. "Martinez, in 15 years of instruction, I've never seen a student handle that scenario so effectively on their first real flight. You didn't just manage the systems, you anticipated problems before they became critical." That evening, Santos called Sarah into her office. "I'm recommending you for accelerated placement into the F-16 program. It's unusual for someone with your background, but your instincts are exceptional. The F-16 community is looking for CSOs who can think 3 steps ahead and stay calm when everything is falling apart. That's exactly what you did today." Sarah stared at the recommendation paperwork, hardly believing what she was reading. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was one of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Combat systems officers in F-16s worked directly with elite pilots on missions that required split-second decisions and flawless execution. "Major, are you sure? I'm just—" Sarah stopped herself before saying, "Nobody," a habit she was slowly breaking. "You're just what, Martinez?" "I'm just a girl from a trailer park who served coffee 6 months ago. This feels like someone else's life." Santos leaned back in her chair, her expression serious but kind. "Martinez, I've flown with Air Force Academy graduates, former enlisted personnel with decades of experience, and pilots who grew up dreaming of nothing but flying fighters. What you have can't be taught or earned through credentials. You have the instinct to see the whole picture and the courage to act when others hesitate. That's rare in any background." 2 weeks later, Sarah received orders for Luke Air Force Base, the same installation where she had watched jets as a child from her grandmother's trailer. She would be returning home, but as someone completely different from the invisible girl who had left 8 months earlier. The F-16 training program was based at Luke, and Sarah would spend the next 6 months learning to operate the most sophisticated combat aircraft systems in the world. She would work with pilots who had flown combat missions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified locations. She would learn to think at the speed of modern warfare, where decisions measured in milliseconds could determine mission success and aircrew survival. On her last night at Pensacola, Sarah called her grandmother from the base phone center. Maria Martinez's voice sounded smaller and more fragile than Sarah remembered, but also proud in a way that made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. "Mija, when you were little, you used to sit on our back steps and watch those planes fly over. You would count them and make up stories about where they were going. I always wondered if you were dreaming about being up there with them." "I don't think I was brave enough to dream that big, Abuela," Sarah replied. "Maybe not then," Maria said. "But you're brave enough now. You make me proud every day." As Sarah packed her few belongings for the move to Luke Air Force Base, she thought about the distance she had traveled, not just geographically, but personally. The girl who had believed she was nobody was about to become part of an elite community of combat aircrews. In 6 months, She would earn her combat systems officer wings and begin flying missions that would test everything she had learned about herself and her capabilities. What Sarah didn't know was that within a year, she would be flying with Captain Jake Morrison, one of the most respected F-16 pilots at Luke, and that together, they would face a situation that would earn her a call sign that would follow her for the rest of her military career. The transformation from invisible to essential was nearly complete, but the most important test was still ahead. Luke Air Force Base looked different through the windshield of an official Air Force vehicle than it had from her grandmother's backyard. Sarah pressed her face to the window as they drove past the flight line, watching F-16's taxi for takeoff with a mixture of excitement and terror. In 3 days, she would be flying in one of those aircraft, beginning the final phase of her combat systems officer training. Captain Jake Morrison had a reputation that preceded him. A veteran pilot with over 2,000 flight hours in the F-16, Morrison had flown combat missions in Syria and had been selected to train new combat systems officers because of his ability to push them beyond what they thought possible while keeping them alive in the process. He was also known for being brutally honest about students who didn't meet his standards. Their first meeting took place in the Squadron briefing room, where Morrison sat across from Sarah with her training file open between them. He was younger than she had expected, probably early 30s, with the kind of focused intensity that made her feel like he could see right through whatever facade she might try to maintain. "Martinez," he said without preamble, "your instructors at Pensacola say you have exceptional instincts but limited technical background. In my aircraft, instincts will keep you alive, but technical knowledge will make you effective. We're going to find out which one matters more." Their first training flight was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Sarah spent the weekend studying aircraft systems manuals, memorizing emergency procedures, and trying not to think about the fact that she would soon be flying at nearly twice the speed of sound in an aircraft that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Tuesday morning came gray and windy, with desert dust swirling across the tarmac. Sarah suited up in the life support equipment room, struggling with the unfamiliar weight of the survival gear and the complexity of the oxygen system connections. Technical Sergeant Murphy, the life support specialist, checked her equipment with practiced efficiency. "First time in a Viper?" Murphy asked, using the pilot's nickname for the F-16. "Yes, Sergeant." "It's different from the trainer. Faster, louder, more responsive. Trust your training and trust your pilot. Captain Morrison's one of the best." The pre-flight briefing with Morrison was thorough and intimidating. He covered the planned mission, a basic familiarization flight with some defensive maneuvering, but spent most of the time on emergency procedures. What to do if the engine failed, how to handle a fire warning, the process for emergency ejection. "The most important thing," Morrison concluded, "is communication. If you don't understand something, ask. If you see something unusual, speak up. If you think I'm making a mistake, tell me. In this aircraft, we're a crew. That means we both have to think." Walking to the aircraft was surreal. Sarah had watched F-16s from a distance her entire life, but up close, the fighter seemed impossibly complex and powerful. The crew chief, a senior airman with grease-stained hands and an encyclopedic knowledge of the aircraft's systems, guided them through the external inspection, pointing out everything from the condition of the tires to the alignment of the control surfaces. Strapping into the back seat of the F-16 was like being connected to a machine designed for a different species. The cockpit was cramped, filled with displays and controls that required her to twist and reach in awkward positions. Morrison's voice came through the intercom as she struggled with the harness connections. "Take your time, Martinez. We're not going anywhere until you're comfortable with the setup." "Engine start," was a controlled explosion of sound and vibration that Sarah felt in her bones. As they taxied toward the runway, Morrison guided her through the pre-takeoff checks, his voice calm and professional as he explained what each system was doing and what she should monitor. "Tower, Viper 21, ready for departure. Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. Viper 21, cleared for takeoff, runway 21 left, winds 240 at 15, gusts to 22. The takeoff acceleration pressed Sarah back into her seat with a force she had never experienced. The ground fell away with startling speed, and within seconds they were climbing through 5,000 feet, the desert landscape spreading out below them like a vast brown map. Sarah's job was to monitor the defensive systems and maintain situational awareness while Morrison flew the aircraft, but for the first few minutes she was simply overwhelmed by the speed and power of the machine they were riding. "How are you doing back there, Martinez?" Morrison asked as they leveled off at 20,000 feet. "Good, sir," Sarah managed, though her voice sounded tight with adrenaline. "Let's start easy. I want you to practice operating the radar warning receiver. Tell me what you see on the display." For the next hour, Morrison walked Sarah through increasingly complex scenarios, simulating threats and system failures while she learned to manage the electronic warfare suite and maintain communication with air traffic control. It was demanding work that required her to think and react faster than she ever had, but gradually, Sarah found herself falling into the rhythm of the aircraft's operations. The critical moment came during their 4th training flight, 3 weeks into the program. Morrison had been pushing Sarah harder with each flight, and their mission that day included aggressive maneuvering and simulated combat scenarios. They were working with other F-16s in a complex exercise when everything went wrong simultaneously. They were flying at 30,000 feet, practicing defensive tactics against simulated surface-to-air missiles, when Morrison's voice suddenly changed tone. "Engine fire warning," he announced, his voice tight with concentration, "running the checklist." Sarah's hands moved automatically to the emergency checklist strapped to her leg, but before she could begin reading the procedures, new warnings began cascading across her displays. The aircraft's defensive systems were showing multiple missile threats from different directions, and the radio was crackling with urgent calls from other aircraft in the exercise. "Martinez, I need threat assessment," Morrison called out as he began emergency descent procedures. "What are you seeing?" Sarah's mind went blank for a crucial second. The combination of real emergency and simulated threats was exactly the kind of scenario that separated capable students from exceptional ones. She could feel Morrison waiting for her response, could sense the aircraft around them maneuvering to avoid the simulated threats, could hear the engine warning tones that indicated their situation was deteriorating rapidly. Then something clicked. The same calm that had carried her through difficult nights at the diner, through basic training, through every challenge of the past year, settled over her like a familiar blanket. Her voice became steady and clear as she began calling out priority information. 2 threats from the southeast, medium range. 1 threat northwest, close range and tracking. Recommend immediate turn to northeast to defeat the close threat while maintaining separation from the others. Morrison executed the turn immediately, his trust in her assessment absolute. Sarah continued managing the electronic warfare systems while monitoring their descent, coordinating with air traffic control and tracking the positions of other aircraft in the exercise. When Morrison announced that the engine fire warning was resolved, it had been a false alarm caused by a faulty sensor, Sarah seamlessly shifted back to managing the simulated combat scenario. "Outstanding," Morrison said as they finally leveled off and began the flight back to Luke. "Martinez, that was textbook crew coordination under pressure. You prioritized correctly, communicated clearly, and kept us out of trouble." But the real test came 2 weeks later, during Sarah's final evaluation flight. Morrison had arranged for a particularly complex scenario involving multiple aircraft, realistic threats, and actual equipment failures designed to push Sarah to her limits. What neither of them expected was that the exercise would coincide with a real-world emergency that would define Sarah's military career. They were flying as part of a four-ship formation, practicing intercept procedures against simulated hostile aircraft when the call came over the radio. Any military aircraft in the Phoenix area, we have a civilian aircraft experiencing navigation failure and possible medical emergency. Aircraft is a Cessna 182, lost contact with air traffic control, believed to be running low on fuel. The formation leader immediately responded, but the civilian aircraft was outside their search area. Morrison, flying as Viper 23, was closest to the last known position of the missing Cessna. Tower Viper 23 requesting permission to divert to assist in search and rescue. Viper 23 approved for diversion. Coordinate with Phoenix approach on frequency 124.7. What followed was 30 minutes of intense searching over the rugged desert terrain northeast of Phoenix. Sarah operated the F-16's radar and visual systems while coordinating with search and rescue helicopters and other aircraft. The civilian plane could be anywhere in hundreds of square miles of mountainous desert, and fuel was becoming a factor for everyone involved in the search. Sarah was scanning the terrain below when she spotted something that didn't belong. A flash of reflected sunlight from a mesa top about 15 miles east of their position. "Captain, I've got something at 2 o'clock about 15 miles. Possible aircraft reflection." Morrison turned toward Sarah's contact, and as they approached, they could see a small aircraft sitting on what appeared to be a flat area near the top of a mesa. The Cessna had managed an emergency landing on terrain that looked impossible for a small aircraft to negotiate. Tower, Viper 23. We have visual contact with the missing aircraft. Aircraft appears to be intact on top of mesa coordinates. Morrison read off their GPS position while Sarah operated the radio to coordinate with search and rescue helicopters. The rescue operation took 3 hours. Sarah maintained communication with the civilian pilot, a man flying his sick wife to a Phoenix hospital when his GPS failed and he became disoriented in the desert, while coordinating the complex helicopter rescue from the mesa top. Her ability to manage multiple radio frequencies, track aircraft positions, and maintain situational awareness throughout the extended operation was flawless. When they finally landed at Luke, Morrison sat quietly in the cockpit for several minutes before speaking. "Martinez, I've been flying F-16s for 8 years and training CSOs for 3. What you did today, finding that aircraft, coordinating the rescue, maintaining communications throughout that entire operation, that was professional-level aircrew work." The next day, Sarah received word that she had not only passed her final evaluation, but had been selected for immediate assignment to the 56th Fighter Wing's operational squadron. More importantly, the pilots and CSOs who had participated in the rescue operation had submitted a recommendation that Sarah be given the call sign Eagle 1 for her exceptional performance during the search and rescue mission. Call signs in fighter squadrons are earned, not assigned, and they typically reflect either outstanding performance or embarrassing mistakes. Eagle 1 was a call sign that carried respect. It suggested someone with the vision to see what others missed and the skills to act on that vision when it mattered most. The call sign ceremony took place in the squadron bar on a Friday evening, with most of the wing's pilots and combat systems officers in attendance. Squadron Commander Colonel Patricia Hayes read the citation that accompanied Sarah's new call sign, describing her performance during the search and rescue mission and her overall excellence during training. "From this day forward," Colonel Hayes announced, "Combat Systems Officer Martinez will be known as Eagle 1, in recognition of her exceptional eyes and professional aircrewmanship that saved 2 lives in the Arizona desert." The room erupted in applause and the traditional champagne shower that accompanied new call sign ceremonies. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came when her grandmother arrived at the ceremony, having been secretly invited by Morrison and the other squadron members. Maria Martinez, now in her 70s and walking with a cane, stood in the crowd of Air Force personnel as her granddaughter was recognized for achievements she could barely comprehend. When Sarah found her after the ceremony, Maria's eyes were bright with tears. "Mija," Maria said, reaching up to touch the silver wings pinned to Sarah's uniform. "When you were little and watched those planes fly over our house, I used to pray that someday you would find something that made you feel important. I never imagined this." "I'm still the same person, Abuela," Sarah replied. "No, mija," Maria said firmly. "You were always this person. You just needed the chance to show the world who you really were." 6 months later, Eagle One was flying operational missions with some of the most experienced pilots in the Air Force. The girl who had once believed she was nobody had become someone whose call sign was spoken with respect in squadron briefings. Her journey from invisible waitress to elite combat systems officer was complete, but in many ways, it was just the beginning. The F-16s still flew over the trailer park where Sarah had grown up, but now when children looked up at the silver fighters streaking across the desert sky, one of those aircraft might be carrying Eagle One. A reminder that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of the most extraordinary things.